My name is Alina Cross, and I am 36 years old. The night I was fired, I was standing in a ballroom I helped pay for, listening to people congratulate themselves for their generosity. The Harrington Foundation charity gala was supposed to be elegant. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen stars from the ceiling. White tablecloths pressed so sharply they looked untouched by human hands. Soft music floated through the room, the kind meant to sound expensive without demanding attention. Everyone looked important, everyone except me. I wore a simple black dress, no designer label, no jewelry worth noticing. My hair was pinned neatly at the back of my neck, professional and forgettable. That was intentional. I had learned a long time ago that when you want to understand people, you don't give them a reason to perform for you. I checked my clipboard, out of habit, not necessity. Development Coordinator was printed beneath my name badge. It made me invisible, which was exactly how I wanted it. At least, until they decided I wasn't invisible enough. I'd been at the foundation for 11 months, long enough to know who mattered and who pretended to, long enough to recognize fake warmth from real kindness, long enough to understand that nonprofit work wasn't about helping people, it was about who got credit for helping people. Margaret Whitcomb ran the department. She loved power, loved hierarchy, loved reminding people where they stood. She smiled at donors like they were royalty and spoke to staff like they were temporary inconveniences. She called it maintaining standards. I called it cruelty with good posture. I noticed her watching me from across the room as I refilled water glasses near the donor tables. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That was my first warning. The second came when I overheard two board members whispering behind a floral arrangement. Is she staff? I think so. She shouldn't be so close to the donors. I stepped away quietly. I always did, because the truth was I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their permission. And they had no idea who I was. At precisely 8:17 p.m., Margaret approached me. She didn't lower her voice. She never did when humiliation was the point. Alina, she said sharply. Why are you hovering? I blinked once. I was assigned table support. That doesn't mean lingering, she snapped. Donors don't like feeling watched. I nodded, apologized. She wasn't finished. This is a high-level event, she continued. People here expect professionalism. You're making us look inexperienced. I could feel eyes turning toward us. Curious, judgmental, waiting. I understand, I said calmly. She leaned closer, her smile tight. Hand me your badge. For a moment, the room felt very quiet. I slowly unclipped it from my dress, placed it in her palm. She looked satisfied. Go home, she said. We'll talk Monday. Then she added, loud enough for others to hear, people like you should be grateful just to be in the room. People like me. I nodded once, turned, and walked away. What Margaret didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 10 minutes later, the chairman would take the stage and ask Donor X to reveal herself. And when I stepped forward, everything would change. I didn't go home after Margaret fired me. I stepped out onto the terrace instead, where the city lights stretched out like 1,000 indifferent eyes. The air was cold enough to sting, sharp enough to keep me grounded. I needed that. Because moments like this have a way of pulling you backward, dragging you through old memories you thought you'd outgrown. For me, it always starts the same way, with a suitcase. I entered the foster system when I was 9 years old. I remember the suitcase because it wasn't really a suitcase. It was a trash bag. Black plastic, stretched thin, the knot tied so tight at the top it cut into my fingers. That was everything I owned. Clothes that didn't fit right. A paperback book missing its cover. A photo of my mother from before she stopped showing up. No one explained anything. They never do. Adults just tell you to be brave and then disappear behind doors they don't invite you through. I learned early that survival wasn't about being loud. It was about being useful. In my first foster home, I washed dishes without being asked. In the second, I helped the younger kids with homework. In the third, I learned how to disappear completely. No noise, no mess, no trouble. Because trouble got you moved. Moved meant another bag, another house, another reset. By the time I was 16, I'd lived in 7 different homes. Different rules, different expectations. Same message every time: don't get attached, don't expect anything, don't assume you'll stay. So I didn't, I worked. At 17, I had 2 jobs and a full class schedule. At 18, I aged out of the system with a pamphlet and a bus pass. No family, no safety net. Just freedom wrapped in fear. People romanticize independence. They talk about it like it's empowering. It is. It's exhausting. I slept on a friend's couch for 3 months. Then a stranger's spare room. Then a studio apartment with a radiator that rattled so loudly, I named it just to feel less alone. I went to college because someone told me it was the way out. I believed them. I studied business and computer science because I wanted leverage. Skills that traveled. Knowledge no one could take away. While other students joined clubs and went to parties, I worked night shifts and taught myself coding between customers. I drank vending machine coffee and learned how to fix my own mistakes because there was no one else to do it. I failed my first startup at 24. Hard. Lost everything I'd saved. Slept in my office for a month because rent didn't care about ambition. I didn't tell anyone. I just started again. The second company worked. It started small, software designed to help mid-sized nonprofits track donations transparently. Boring to investors. Too ethical to be flashy, but nonprofits noticed. They were tired of chaos. Tired of scandals. Tired of donors asking questions they couldn't answer. The company grew quietly. 3 years later, a large firm acquired it. 8 figures, just like that. I remember staring at the contract, my hands shaking, not from excitement, but disbelief. After everything, after all the nights I wondered if it was worth it, the math finally worked in my favor. Money didn't change me, but it did something better. It gave me control. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't post announcements. I paid off my debts, bought a modest apartment. And then I did something no one expected. I gave most of it away, anonymously. Because when you grow up invisible, recognition doesn't feel safe. It feels like exposure. I didn't want plaques or applause. I wanted outcomes. Programs that stayed open. Kids who didn't lose support because some board member wanted a bigger office. That's how Donor X was born. A shell trust, clean, quiet, impossible to trace back to me unless you knew where to look. The Harrington Foundation found me during a funding crisis. They were desperate. Grants had dried up. Salaries were at risk, programs on the chopping block. I reviewed their proposal personally, approved it, then I approved another, and another. 3 years of funding, millions of dollars. They called me visionary, transformational, essential. They just didn't know they said those things about the woman refilling their water glasses. That's why I took the job at the foundation. Not for the paycheck, for proximity. I wanted to see how they treated people when they thought no one important was watching. I wanted to know if my money was building something real or just inflating egos. Margaret failed that test almost immediately. She took credit for donor relationships she'd never touched. She dismissed staff ideas if they came from the wrong title. She talked about mission like it was branding instead of responsibility. I kept notes. Quiet ones, not out of anger, out of clarity. Because power does corrupt, it reveals. And Margaret revealed everything. On the terrace, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls, the chairman. 1 unread message from an unknown number. We're ready when you are. I looked back through the glass doors into the ballroom. Margaret was laughing now, radiant, confident. Safe in the belief that she'd just put someone insignificant in their place. The board members clinked glasses. The music swelled. They were about to announce Donor X. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to stay hidden. I felt calm. Because whatever happened next, no one would ever be able to make me small again. Inside the ballroom, the lights dimmed slightly. It was subtle, intentional. The kind of cue that told people something important was about to happen. Conversations softened. Glasses lowered. Phones came out, not openly, just enough to be ready. The chairman of the Harrington Foundation stepped onto the stage. Arthur Bellman had the look of a man who had never been told no. Silver hair, tailored tuxedo, the relaxed confidence of someone who believed the world worked because people like him managed it. He tapped the microphone. "Good evening," he said, smiling as applause rolled through the room. "Tonight is a celebration not just of generosity but of impact." Margaret stood near the front, hands clasped, posture perfect. She looked proud, expectant, like a woman certain she was standing on the right side of history. Arthur continued. "For 3 years, this foundation has been sustained by a benefactor who asked for nothing in return. No recognition, no naming rights, no press." The room murmured approvingly. Arthur nodded. "We've called them Donor X." Margaret's smile widened. I watched from the terrace doorway, unseen, as the words I'd read hundreds of times in emails were spoken aloud. Arthur gestured toward the screen behind him. Charts appeared, numbers, growth curves, before and after photos of programs that should have shut down, but didn't. Emergency housing kept open, scholarships fully funded, staff salaries preserved during the pandemic. Applause again, louder this time. Margaret wiped at the corner of her eye. I recognized the gesture. She used it whenever attention drifted too far from her. Arthur raised a hand for quiet. "Tonight," he said, "Donor X has agreed to step out of anonymity." The room leaned forward as one. Margaret's head snapped up. Arthur smiled. "They wanted to meet the people whose lives they changed." A beat. Then Arthur looked down at his notes and frowned, just slightly. I knew that look. It was the look of a man realizing something didn't match the script. Because earlier that afternoon, Arthur's assistant had emailed me in a panic. "We don't have Donor X's contact info. Do you?" I'd replied with one sentence. "You do now." Arthur cleared his throat. "Donor X," he said slowly, "is with us tonight." Margaret turned, scanning the room. Her eyes passed over donors, board members. People who looked important. She didn't see me, because she never had. Arthur hesitated. Then his gaze lifted and locked onto the terrace doorway, onto me. The silence sharpened. Confusion rippled through the crowd like a dropped glass about to shatter. Arthur's voice wavered just enough to be human. "Elena Cross," he said. Would you join us?" Every head turned. Margaret followed their gaze. Her face changed. First confusion, then disbelief, then something close to terror. I stepped forward, not fast, not slow, measured. Each step echoed louder than the music ever had. I walked past tables where people stared openly now. Some recognized me as staff. Some didn't recognize me at all. Arthur stepped back from the microphone, eyes wide. I took my place beside him. The screen behind us still glowed with numbers that existed because of me. Arthur leaned in, whispering urgently. "Elena," he said, "there's been a misunderstanding." I smiled gently. "No," I said, "there hasn't." Margaret pushed forward through the crowd, her voice cut sharp and shrill. "This is inappropriate," she snapped. "She's an employee. This is some kind of mistake." Arthur looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. I reached for the microphone. The room held its breath. "My name is Elena Cross," I said. "And I am Donor X." The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It was something heavier, like the foundation itself cracking. Margaret staggered back a step. Arthur went pale. I continued. "For 3 years, I funded this organization because I believed in its mission. I believed in the people doing the work." I paused. "And tonight I was fired, publicly, for existing in the wrong place." Whispers exploded. Arthur opened his mouth. I raised a hand. "I'm not finished." The room went dead silent. I turned slightly, meeting Margaret's eyes. "You told me people like me should be grateful just to be in the room." I let that land. "So I want to thank you," I said calmly, "for showing me exactly what this room is built on." I turned back to the audience. "Effective immediately," I said. "My trust is withdrawing all funding." Someone dropped a glass. Arthur whispered, "Elena, please." "I've already spoken to legal counsel," I said. "This isn't emotional, it's ethical." I stepped back from the microphone and handed it to him. Margaret looked like she might faint. The board members stared at one another in horror. The foundation's lifeline had just walked away. And the night was far from over. For a full 3 seconds after I stepped away from the microphone, no one moved. Not applause, not outrage, not even denial, just shock. Then the room exploded. Board members huddled together in frantic whispers. Donors checked their phones, suddenly very aware that proximity to a collapsing foundation was not a good look. Conversations turned sharp, urgent, fearful. Arthur grabbed my arm too tightly. "Elena," he hissed, steering me toward a side corridor. "We need to talk, privately." I allowed it. Not because he deserved it, because I wanted to hear what panic sounded like when it had nowhere left to hide. The hallway was quiet, carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps. The noise from the ballroom became a distant, muffled chaos. Arthur let go of my arm. "You blindsided us," he said, running a hand through his hair. "This was supposed to be an honor." "A celebration." "It was," I replied evenly, "until your leadership made it a firing." "That wasn't a board decision," he said quickly. "Margaret overstepped." I tilted my head. "You don't get to claim ignorance," I said. "Not when you benefit from the culture you allow." Arthur swallowed. "We can fix this," he said. "We can issue an apology, reinstate your position. Name a program after you." There it was, recognition as currency. I smiled, small and sad. "You don't understand," I said. "I never wanted a seat at your table." "I wanted the table to be worth sitting at." Arthur exhaled sharply. "Do you have any idea what pulling funding does?" he snapped. "We employ people. Families depend on this. So did the staff you let Margaret humiliate," I said. "So did the programs you let her underfund while she padded her image." His jaw clenched. "This will destroy us." "Yes," I said, "and that destruction will be educational." Before he could respond, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Margaret, her heels clicked too fast. Her posture was gone. Her face was tight with rage, barely holding back something closer to fear. "This is insane," she said. "You can't do this." I looked at her, really looked. "You fired me," I said, "publicly without cause." "I had the authority, you abused it," she scoffed. "You were nobody." Arthur flinched. I kept my voice calm. "That's the problem," I said. "You only respect power when it looks like you." Margaret turned to Arthur, desperation cracking through her anger. "Arthur, tell her this can't stand." Arthur didn't answer. Because he was doing math, and the numbers were catastrophic. My phone vibrated, once. Then again, I checked it. A message from my attorney. "Press has picked it up. Social media is moving fast." I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Margaret noticed. "What is that?" she demanded. "The future," I said. Her confidence collapsed. "You're ruining lives," she whispered. I stepped closer. "No," I said quietly. "I'm stopping you from doing it again." I turned to Arthur. "You have 12 hours," I said. "Before the trust issues a public statement detailing why funding was withdrawn." Arthur's face drained of color. "And Margaret," I added, turning back to her. "You might want to update your resume." She laughed, high and brittle. "You think this ends with me," she snapped. "You think you walk away clean." I met her eyes. "I already have," I said. And I left them standing there. Outside, the city felt different. Louder. Sharper. Alive. My phone buzzed nonstop now. Messages, missed calls, unknown numbers. I didn't answer any of them. Because tonight wasn't about noise. It was about consequence. And consequences were finally catching up. By morning, the story was everywhere. It started small. One tweet from an attendee who thought they'd witnessed the wildest nonprofit gala meltdown of the year. By noon, it had a headline. Foundation's top donor fired as staff. Withdraws millions in funding by evening. It was trending. I watched it unfold from my kitchen table, coffee untouched, sunlight cutting across the floor like it had something to prove. I hadn't slept, not because I regretted anything, but because years of silence had finally cracked open and the world was rushing in. Journalists called, bloggers speculated. Former employees shared stories they'd buried for years. A pattern emerged. Margaret's name kept appearing, not as a hero, not as a leader, but as a liability. Anonymous posts described public humiliations, credit theft, quiet retaliation. Screenshots surfaced, emails she thought were private, messages sent at midnight demanding work without pay, reminders that gratitude goes a long way. The board issued a statement by noon. A misunderstanding occurred. We are reviewing internal processes. We remain committed to our mission. No apology, no accountability. That lasted 6 hours. Then Margaret broke her silence. She shouldn't have. Her statement went live on LinkedIn at 4:17 p.m. I remember the time because my attorney texted me one word. Wow. Margaret called the incident an elaborate setup. She claimed I had intentionally misrepresented myself to gain access, that I'd violated internal policy, that the foundation was the real victim. She implied I'd manipulated the board. She implied I was unstable. She didn't use the word woman, but she didn't have to. The internet noticed. Within minutes, people started pulling threads. Old conference panels, photos, past interviews where Margaret spoke about maintaining standards and keeping the wrong people out of leadership. The comments were brutal. Former colleagues contradicted her publicly. Donors asked for refunds. Board members quietly deleted their bios. Then the emails leaked. Not mine, hers, an internal thread from 2 months earlier. Margaret, writing to Arthur, "We don't actually need donor X, we need the appearance of influence. Once the expansion is done, we can pivot." Another message, later that night, "Staff like Alina are replaceable. Donors aren't." The irony was surgical. Arthur resigned by midnight. The board followed 2 days later. The Harrington Foundation suspended operations within the week. Margaret didn't go quietly. She tried to sue, claimed defamation, breach of trust, emotional distress. Her lawyer contacted mine. My attorney sent back one document, a timeline, 3 years of funding approvals, internal reviews, notes I'd kept, evidence of misconduct I'd documented long before the gala, plus a clause. One Margaret had signed herself, a code of conduct agreement tied to donor ethics. The lawsuit vanished. So did Margaret. No more posts, no more statements, no more defenses, just silence. The kind she used to weaponize. A month later, I received an email from a former program director. She wrote, "Because of what you did, I started my own nonprofit. I don't know if it'll survive. But I know I'll never run it like they did." I sat with that for a long time. Then I opened a new document and started planning, not revenge, replacement. I didn't rush into anything. That surprised people. They expected a press tour, a victory lap, a dramatic announcement with my name in bold letters and a mission statement polished by consultants. I did none of that. Because I wasn't interested in replacing one broken system with another shiny version of the same mistakes. Instead, I listened. For 3 months, I met with people the Harrington Foundation never had time for. Program coordinators, social workers, case managers, volunteers who'd burned out quietly. Donors who'd walked away years earlier because something felt wrong and they couldn't explain why. I didn't invite them to fancy offices. We met in libraries, coffee shops, community centers with flickering lights and folding chairs that never sat evenly on the floor. I asked one question over and over. What made it harder than it had to be? The answers were painfully consistent. Too much ego at the top, too little trust at the ground level. Decisions made for optics, not outcomes. So when I finally filed the paperwork for my new foundation, I did it differently. No single executive director, no bloated board. No hierarchy built on proximity to power. Instead, a rotating leadership council. Term limits, radical transparency, budgets published in real time. Some people said it sounded messy. They weren't wrong, but it was honest. The first grant we issued was small, just enough to keep a housing program open for 6 more months. No press release. Just a wire transfer and a call to the director saying, "You don't have to close your doors." She cried. I cried after we hung up, not because it felt good, but because it felt heavy. This was different from donating anonymously. Now, every decision had a face. Every mistake would have a name attached to it. Mine. That kind of accountability changes you. It slows you down. It should. Not everyone was happy. Some former Harrington donors accused me of burning bridges, of being too idealistic, of creating a foundation that wouldn't scale. They weren't entirely wrong either. Scaling ethically is hard, but I'd learned something in tech. Growth without integrity is just collapse delayed. 6 months in, I got an email from Margaret. The subject line was blank. So was the body. No apology, no accusation, just silence. For a moment, I considered replying. Then I deleted it, not out of spite, out of closure. Some conversations don't need an ending. They end because you walk away. On the 1-year anniversary of the gala, I stood in a crowded community center and watched kids line up for backpacks filled with supplies they wouldn't have had otherwise. No cameras, no speeches. Just noise and laughter and a sense of something working the way it was supposed to. Someone asked me if I missed being anonymous. I thought about it. Then I said the truth. Sometimes, I said. But I don't miss being silent. Success attracts attention. Not the loud kind at first. The quiet kind that watches, waits, and then offers you shortcuts disguised as opportunities. 9 months after the foundation launched, I received an email from a consulting firm I recognized immediately. Global reach, impressive clients. A reputation for optimizing nonprofits the way private equity firms optimize companies. Their pitch was flattering. They praised our transparency, our engagement numbers, our authentic narrative. Then they made the offer. They wanted to partner. They could triple our funding capacity in a year, introduce us to major donors, streamline operations, put us on the global stage. All they needed was influence, a seat on the council, veto power on high-risk grants, the ability to shape messaging, in other words, control. The old version of me would have hesitated, not because the offer was bad, because it was tempting. We were struggling, not financially, but logistically. Systems buckled under growth. People burned out trying to do everything the right way. This offer promised relief, efficiency, distance from the mess. The council was split. Half of them wanted to say yes. This is how we survive, one member said. Impact requires scale. Another countered, scale requires compromise. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't spoken. Because I was remembering something Margaret once said during a budget meeting. We don't need ethics. We need optics. I stood. If we accept this, I said slowly, we become impressive. Silence. And if we refuse, I continued, we stay accountable. That landed harder. I asked for 48 hours. They agreed. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked the city, no destination, just movement. I passed the building where my first startup failed. The shelter I'd funded quietly years ago. The cafe where I'd once interviewed for a job I didn't get because I wasn't a culture fit. I realized something uncomfortable. The offer wasn't testing the foundation. It was testing me. Whether I still believed what I said on that stage, or whether it was easier to believe it when I had nothing left to lose. The next day, I called a meeting. I declined the partnership, not gently, not apologetically. Publicly, I explained why. I published the offer and my reasoning on our website, full transparency. The backlash was immediate. Some donors pulled out. Headlines questioned our sustainability. People called me naive. I let them, because something else happened too. Smaller donors stepped in. People who didn't want their names on buildings, but wanted their money used cleanly. We didn't triple in size, but we stabilized. And stability, I learned, is its own kind of success. 2 weeks later, a junior staff member came to me, shaking. She decaught an error. A grant misallocated. No one would notice. We could fix it quietly. Old systems would have. I took a breath. Report it, I said, publicly. Her eyes widened. But it'll make us look bad. No, I said, it'll make us real. We corrected it, owned it, moved on. Trust increased, not decreased. That's when I knew we weren't just avoiding corruption. We were building resistance to it. And that was something worth protecting. The email sat unopened for 3 days. Not because I hadn't seen it, because I had. The sender's name alone was enough to pull me somewhere I hadn't visited in years. Marion Holt, my last foster mother. The only one who ever tried to keep me. I hadn't spoken to her since I turned 18, not out of anger, not even distance, just drift. When you leave the system, you don't leave with closure. You leave with momentum. Forward motion becomes survival, and looking back feels dangerous, like you might lose speed and never get it back. I finally opened the email on a Sunday morning when the office was quiet and the city felt slower. It was short. I saw you on the news. I'm proud of you. If you ever want to talk, I'd like that. No guilt, no demands, just an open door. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. Then I replied. We met at a diner halfway between our lives. Same red booths, same laminated menus. Different versions of us sitting across the table. Marion had more gray now. Her hands shook slightly when she lifted her coffee, but her eyes were the same. Sharp, kind, too perceptive for comfort. I didn't know if you'd come, she said. I didn't either, I admitted. She smiled softly. You were always like that, brave on the outside, cautious underneath. I laughed once. You're still good at reading people, she shrugged. Comes with the job. We talked about safe things at first, the weather, the diner, her garden. Then she said it. I'm sorry I couldn't adopt you. The words hit harder than I expected. I know, I said quickly. You tried. I didn't try hard enough, she said. I let the system win. I shook my head. The system wins by default. You fought it. She studied me. You learned how to survive alone, she said, but you never learned how to stop. Something in my chest tightened, because she was right. Success had been my armor, control my currency, and rest still felt like risk. Before we left, she handed me an envelope. I kept this, she said. Didn't feel right to throw it away. Inside was the photo I thought I'd lost, my mother, before things fell apart, young, smiling, hopeful. I hadn't seen that face in decades. I swallowed hard. She loved you, Marion said, even when she couldn't show it. I know, I whispered, and for the first time I believed it. That night I went home and did something I hadn't done since childhood. I unpacked memories, not to hurt, to integrate. I realized something important. The foundation wasn't just about fixing systems. It was about giving people something I never had, continuity. Someone staying, even when it's hard. The next morning, I approved a new initiative, long-term mentorship for kids aging out of foster care, 10-year commitments, no expiration dates. Because survival shouldn't require disappearance. The invitation arrived on heavy paper, cream-colored, embossed, the kind of envelope that tells you this isn't a request, it's an expectation. A national nonprofit coalition was honoring transformational leaders. My name was at the top of the list. Keynote speaker, Lifetime Impact Award, press coverage guaranteed. My assistant was thrilled. This is huge, she said. This puts us on the map permanently. She wasn't wrong. The offer came with more than applause, corporate sponsors, a 7-figure pledge. The kind of stability that lets you breathe easier at night. There was just one condition. They wanted my story, the foster care, the firing, the downfall of Harrington. They wanted the villain. The triumph, the clean arc people could clap for and forget about later. I asked for the schedule, 40 minutes, not one slot for the people actually doing the work. That night, I sat alone in my office long after everyone left. I imagined saying yes. Imagined the standing ovation, the safety of being admired instead of questioned. Then I imagined the foundation 5 years from now, with my face on the website, with donors donating to me, not the mission, with staff wondering whether disagreement was welcome or dangerous. The thing about power is that it rarely announces when it's returning. It just asks politely. I declined the keynote. Instead, I sent a counteroffer. I would attend, but only if the stage belonged to the council, to the case managers, to the people whose names never trend. They refused. I didn't argue, I withdrew. The seven-figure pledge disappeared. So did the headlines. For a week, it felt like a mistake. Then something else happened. Smaller coalitions reached out. They didn't want a hero. They wanted a framework. How did you build this without becoming them? One message asked. I smiled at that, because that was the real story. A month later, I received another envelope. This one was thinner, handwritten address. Inside was a letter from a teenager in our mentorship program. I don't know if this is weird, but they said you helped start this. I'm not invisible here. That's new for me. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in my desk drawer. That was the applause I kept. On the anniversary of the gala, I walked past the old Harrington building. Empty now. Signs gone, windows dark. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Some chapters don't end with triumph. They end with peace. I don't go to galas anymore, not because I'm bitter. Because I've learned the difference between rooms that exist to be seen in and rooms that exist to hold people. On the day of our foundation's 5th anniversary, there was no celebration, no speeches, no press, no spotlight, just a long table in a community center that smelled faintly of coffee and old books. People brought food from home. Someone forgot napkins. Someone else brought too many. It was perfect. I sat at the end of the table, listening. A former foster kid talking about college applications. A case manager sharing a win that wouldn't make headlines. A volunteer laughing too loud at her own joke. No one looked at me like I was the point. That was the point. Later, a young woman stayed behind as the room emptied. She looked nervous. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. If this place hadn't existed, I don't know where I'd be. I nodded. You'd have found a way. She shook her head. Maybe. But it helped that someone stayed. Stayed. The word landed softly and stayed with me, because that's what changed everything. Not money, not exposure, not even justice. Consistency. When you grow up disappearing, consistency feels like love. That night, I walked home alone. The city was quieter than it used to be, or maybe I was. I thought about the girl with the trash bag. The woman on the terrace, the donor behind the curtain. They weren't different people. They were chapters of the same one. I never needed revenge. I needed to stop believing I had to earn my place by being smaller. Sometimes people still ask me if I regret it, if I regret walking away from power, from recognition, from easier paths. I tell them the truth. I didn't walk away, I say. I walked toward something better. They usually nod, but they don't really understand. That's okay. This story wasn't built for applause. It was built to last. They fired me because they thought I didn't belong in the room. So I built one, and I left the door open.